Moving on to the next item, which is the role of special need assistants. And just to outline, as part of the work programme agreed by the committee, Deputy O'Riordan has agreed with the committee to prepare a report on the role of SNAs. Policy briefs on this issue have been circulated to all members, and the remainder of today's meeting is devoted to basically initiating the preparation of this report. And in that regard, I'd like to welcome to the meeting the National Council for Special Education, which is represented by Teresa Griffin and Mary Byrne. The National Parents Council Primary, which is represented by Anya Lynch and Carmel O'Shea. The National Parents Council Post Primary, represented by Don Myers and Jim Moore. And the Trade Union Impact, represented by Dessie Robinson and Mary McCrogan. I now invite Ms Griffin to make the opening remarks on behalf of the NCSE.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I wish to introduce my colleagues, Mary Byrne, who's the NCSE Head of Special Education, and Shay Goulding, who's the NCSE Head of Operations. And just at the outset, if you could please excuse and bear with me, I developed a cold overnight. I don't know if it's an allergy to coming here today, but the timing isn't great. Anyway, the NCSE is a very strong supporter of the SNA scheme, as we know that without SNAs, many students would be unable to attend school. The intention of the scheme is to provide sufficient support to meet a student's care needs, but to fade the support over time as students' needs reduce. Schools' SNA support can change year on year as students leave, enrol and develop greater independence. And this year, 56% of schools experienced no change, 21% had an increased allocation and 23% a lower allocation, and that's broadly in line with last year. We've allocated almost 10,500 SNA posts to schools to support 22,000 students and are continuing to respond to ongoing applications for SNA support. 7,000 of these students attend special schools, and generally speaking, they have considerably more complex needs and greater care needs than mainstream students. Special schools and special classes have an average of 1 SNA for every 3.3 students. In mainstream settings, it is 1 SNA for every 1.47 students supported. And I think you can easily see from these figures that per qualifying students, mainstream schools have more SNA support than special schools. Even though the reason for this is that even though some students in mainstream may only require SNA support at transition times during the day or break times or for toileting reasons, it may be necessary to allocate a full-time post to the school because the support may be required intermittently during the day. Mainstream schools can therefore have additional capacity to cater for significant care needs from other students as they may emerge during a school year. For example, this year, this capacity enables schools to support the care needs of some 2,000 additional students between September and December 2012. And I wish to reassure members that additional SNAs were allocated where there was need, and that the NCSE is confident that the schools were resourced to meet the care needs of the students concerned. Members might like to know this year, over 99% of the 22,000 applications processed by the NCSE for additional teaching or SNA support have been processed without any appeal. And just to put that into context, we have had 76 appeals. 54 of them in respect of SNAs and 22 in respect of resource teaching decisions, and that's from 22,000 applications that we've processed. And we know that some appeals are not necessarily about a CNO's decision, but because there's confusion about the scheme itself. So why is there confusion? Well, there's clear evidence that the role of the SNA has been informally expanded by schools to introduce and include an educational remit. Some parents, schools and professionals consider that an SNA is allocated by the NCSE to help with literacy difficulties or to provide therapeutic support, such as speech and language therapy. Often, when SNA care support is being faded or withdrawn completely, a school might advise that they would like the SNA to do other work with the student, such as improvement of language, literacy, numeracy, and so on. And over 30% of this year's applications were declined for these and other reasons. And this is really serious because each application raises expectations and hopes. And when applications are declined because they don't meet the criteria for the scheme, there's disappointment, there's concern, anxiety and anger, and a belief that the NCSE is not doing its job properly or that cuts are the reason for non-allocation. It's occasionally been suggested that teaching assistants should be introduced to provide additional educational support to these students. And some recent research studies raised serious concerns about the effectiveness of teaching assistant support for students with special educational needs. While finding some positive effects on teachers' workload and stress levels, these studies found that the more support students received from teaching assistants, the less progress they made in subjects such as English, maths and science. Students with special educational needs spent over a quarter of their school time away from mainstream class, their teachers and their peers. They were almost constantly occupied by a teacher assistant who bore the greatest portion of responsibility for planning and teaching them. They became overly dependent on the teacher assistant support and socially isolated from their peers. And despite the good intentions of teaching assistants, these students received a less appropriate and lower quality educational experience than other students. One US study noted that the substantial increase in teacher assistant use in US schools had taken place without any compelling evidence that it's educationally sound to deploy the least qualified personnel to provide primary instruction to students with the most complex learning characteristics. On the other hand, research findings consistently demonstrate a strong relationship between the quality of teaching and outcomes achieved by this group of students. Given this research, the paraprofessionals can act as a barrier to students' access to teaching, to the teacher, and full participation in classroom activities, and that it is the quality of teaching which determines better educational outcomes. In our recent policy advice to the Minister on supporting students with special educational needs, we considered that there is insufficient evidence at this point in time to support the introduction of a new teaching assistant grade to work specifically with students with special educational needs. Though we do recognise in other jurisdictions, obviously teacher assistants work with children who have literacy difficulties, not necessarily children who have special educational needs. We have recommended that the DES should clarify the role of the SNA and that the SNA work should at all times be focused on developing independent skills. The NCC believes that students with complex learning needs should be taught by fully qualified and experienced teachers equipped with the necessary skills to meet their needs. Thank you.
Okay. I'm now going to invite Ms. Lynn.